They say grief has 5 stages, but for a woman who spent 50 years in a cage built by the man they were now burying, there was only one: liberation. And as my son eulogized a saint I never knew, I realized my freedom was already under threat from a new jailer. This is the story of how I, a 75-year-old widow they tried to discard, dismantled my family's empire of lies to reclaim my life. Before we begin, make sure you follow my channel, hit that like button and ring the notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single moment of how this story unfolds. The air in Meadow Creek's pristine chapel was heavy, thick with the cloying scent of lilies, and a hypocrisy so dense you could taste it. I sat, my spine a rigid line against the polished wood of the front pew, a black veil doing a poor job of hiding the vast, stoic emptiness in my eyes. 50 years. 50 years of marriage to Richard Vance, the man now reduced to a flattering, airbrushed portrait, propped on an easel next to a vulgar cascade of white roses. My son, Thomas, stood at the lectern, his voice trembling with a carefully rehearsed sorrow. He spoke of a titan of finance, a pillar of the community, a loving father. He spoke of a man I had never, not once, met. Beside me, my daughter-in-law, Chloe, a woman sculpted from ambition and sharp angles, performed her role with chilling precision. She dabbed at a perfectly dry eye with a corner of a Gucci handkerchief, her gaze sweeping over the assembled mourners, calculating, assessing. She wasn't mourning a man, she was auditing an estate. The service droned on, a meaningless symphony of platitudes. When it finally concluded, a slow procession of guests filed past, their hands patting my shoulder, their mouths forming hollow syllables of comfort. He was a great man, Elizabeth. Such a loss. He's in a better place. I nodded, a porcelain doll of a widow, my silence mistaken for sorrow. Then Chloe leaned in. Her body was a rigid barrier between me and the last departing guest. Her breath, a cool gust of mint and malice, tickled the fine hairs on my neck. I expected another empty phrase, another rote condolence. Instead, her voice, a low, urgent whisper meant only for me, sliced through the funereal haze. I have already spoken to the realtor, Elizabeth, a man named Peterson. He's the best in Meadow Creek. He says the market is at an absolute peak right now. We need to move fast if we want to get top dollar for the house and speed up the inheritance. The words weren't just heard, they were felt. A physical blow that landed with more force than any of Richard's tirades. The lilies, the organ music, the stained glass light, it all receded into a dull, humming background. My husband wasn't even in the ground, his ashes still warm in a polished urn, and she was talking about real estate commissions. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I simply stared at the portrait of the stranger on the easel, my hands clenching into tight fists inside my black gloves. Later, at the cemetery, a cold Oregon wind whipped around the manicured gravestones. The small private ceremony for the interment of the ashes was a mercifully brief affair. As the last of the distant relatives and Richard's business associates drove away, leaving a trail of exhaust fumes in the crisp air, I sought a moment of solitude. I drifted away from the freshly disturbed earth, my feet carrying me toward a large, weeping marble angel that stood guard over a forgotten family plot. I rested a hand on its cold, smooth wing, the chill seeping through my glove, a welcome, grounding sensation. It was there, shielded by the statue's silent grief, that I heard them. Chloe and Thomas stood near the gleaming black limousine, thinking they were out of earshot. Their voices, though hushed, carried on the wind, sharp and frantic. It was Chloe's voice, a venomous hiss, that cut through the air first.
I don't understand what the problem is, Thomas. It's a simple, logical step. She can't possibly manage that house.
Chloe, for God's sake, it's Dad's funeral. Thomas's voice was a weak, frayed rope, straining against an unbearable weight. Can we not do this right now? It's her home.
It's not a home. It's an asset.
She snapped back, her voice losing its whisper and gaining a sharp, impatient edge.
It's a 4,000 square foot architectural showpiece with a pool that costs a fortune to maintain and property taxes that could fund a small nation. She can't live there alone. It's a waste. It's irresponsible. We're losing money every day we wait.
So what do you suggest we do? Kick her out onto the street? The sarcasm in his voice was thin, brittle.
Don't be so dramatic,
Chloe scoffed.
I have already researched it. There's a place, Golden Meadows. It's lovely. It's more of a resort, really. They have gardens, organised activities.
Round-the-clock nursing staff. It's perfect. She'll be safe there. Cared for. It's for the best, Thomas. For her. The lie was so blatant, so perfectly constructed, that it was almost a work of art. For her. The three most dangerous words in my world. Mum will never agree, Thomas mumbled, his defeat palpable even from a distance. She loves that house. She'll agree because she has to. Chloe's voice was now cold, hard steel. She doesn't have a choice. Richard's will makes you the executor. You are in charge of his affairs, which, by extension, means you are in charge of hers. We will present it to her as a loving, responsible decision. We'll tell her it's what your father would have wanted, and you will back me up. Are we clear? There was a long pause. The wind sighed through the fir trees. I could picture Thomas standing there, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of weary conflict, a ghost in his own life. Finally, a single broken word drifted across the grass. Clear. I didn't move. I stayed behind my marble angel, my stone guardian, until the black limousine had pulled away, leaving me alone with the dead and the dying echo of a verdict already passed. The cage had a new architect. The Vance family home, a marvel of glass, steel and suffocating silence, became my prison in the days that followed. It was a structure Richard had commissioned to be featured in magazines, not to be lived in. It had clean lines and cold surfaces, and it had never, not once, felt like a home. Now it was a battleground. Chloe had taken over, her presence an invasive species choking the life out of every room. She was a whirlwind of hostile energy, her phone permanently attached to her ear. I would be sitting in the living room, trying to find a moment of quiet, and she would stride in, not even acknowledging my presence. No, the lines are good, but the furniture is all wrong, she'd say into her phone, her voice echoing off the concrete floors. It's too personal, too dated. We need to depersonalize, stage it, a neutral palette. Make it look like a gallery, not a mausoleum. She would walk through the rooms, tapping on walls, her sharp nails making a sound like a woodpecker drilling into a dead tree. She was discussing staging and curb appeal with the realtor, her voice filled with a feverish excitement. She was selling my life out from under me before I had even had a chance to pack it. Thomas was a phantom, a ghost haunting the hallways of his own childhood. He moved through the house with a permanent flinch, as if expecting a blow. He avoided my gaze at all costs. If we passed in the hall, his eyes would dart to the floor, to a painting on the wall, anywhere but my face. I tried once to corner him in the kitchen. He was staring into the cavernous, empty stainless steel refrigerator, a look of profound lostness on his face. "Thomas," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He jumped, startled. "Mum, I didn't see you there." We need to talk, I began. About what Chloe is doing. About this realtor. His face immediately clouded over. The familiar mask of weary conflict snapped into place. Chloe's she's being practical, Mum. She's good at this stuff. It's a lot to handle. The estate, the finances. Dad left things complicated. He couldn't even finish the sentence. He grabbed a bottle of water he didn't want from the fridge and turned away. I have to take a call. Work thing. He practically fled the room, leaving me alone with the hum of the refrigerator. He was a coward. A weak, frightened boy in a 45-year-old man's body, terrified of his wife, terrified of his father's ghost, and most of all, terrified of his own conscience. I found myself retreating. My world shrank to the one room in the house I had never been welcome in, Richard's library. It was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. He had always kept it locked. "A man needs his space, Elizabeth," he would say, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My work is complex. You wouldn't understand." In 50 years I had entered it perhaps 3 times, always at his explicit invitation, to serve him coffee or retrieve a file. Now, with him gone, the door was just a door. I pushed it open. The air inside was still, thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and deceit. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with books on architecture, finance, and philosophy. Books I doubted he'd ever actually read. They were props, just like the expensive art on the walls and the dutiful wife in the other room. I ran my hand along the spines, the dust of fine powder on my fingertips. I sank into his oversized, throne-like leather chair behind the massive mahogany desk. The leather sighed under my weight, a sound of protest. For a moment I felt like a trespasser. Then a different feeling began to settle in, a sense of ownership. The silence in this room was different from the silence in the rest of the house. It wasn't empty, it was heavy. It was filled with the unspoken weight of Richard's control, a presence so powerful it lingered after his death. It was in this room, surrounded by the artifacts of his power, that the full, brutal truth of my situation crystallized. I unlocked my phone, a simple device Thomas had bought me for emergencies. I rarely used it, but Chloe had insisted I join Instagram, to stay connected. I opened the app. Her profile was the first thing on the feed. There it was. A professionally filtered, artfully angled photograph of the house at dusk, the lights glowing warmly, the pool a sheet of turquoise glass. The caption was a masterpiece of performative grief and aspirational greed. New beginnings on the horizon. So much to process, but we're taking it one day at a time, honoring Dad's legacy and securing the future. #family-first, #legacy, #Vance estate, #grateful. Underneath, the comments poured in from her circle of equally vacuous friends. "Stunning! Thinking of you, babe. Height. Your dad would be so proud of how strong you're being. Smally, smally, smally. That house is a dream. Can't wait to see what you do with it. Smally, smally, smally." I stared at the screen, at the likes accumulating like tiny digital vultures. The house wasn't a home. It wasn't a memory. It was the grand prize. It was the legacy. And I, the grieving widow, was not the keeper of the flame. I was the aging, inconvenient guard dog, chained to the front porch, and they were simply deciding on the most humane way to put me down. A cold, clear anger began to burn through the fog of shock and sorrow. It was a foreign feeling. An ember I thought had been extinguished decades ago, now stirring, glowing in the dark. The family meeting, or as I had come to think of it, my sentencing, was staged 2 days later. Chloe, ever the director, chose the stark white living room as her stage. The room was designed for effect, not for comfort, with its low-slung Italian furniture and vast, unforgiving windows that looked out onto a perfectly manicured, soul-crushingly empty lawn. She had me sit on a couch that felt more like a piece of sculpture than a place to rest, while she and Thomas took the 2 opposing armchairs, creating a perfect triangle of confrontation. On the glass coffee table between us, a glossy trifold brochure was laid out, its cheerful colours a grotesque contrast to the mood in the room. In bold, friendly letters, it read, "Golden Meadows Senior Living, your next chapter in sunshine." Chloe began, her voice a syrupy concoction of condescending sweetness. "Look, Elizabeth," she said, leaning forward and pushing the brochure towards me. "We've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of research because we love you and we are worried about you being here all alone." She paused, letting the lie hang in the air. "We found the most wonderful place. It's called Golden Meadows." She tapped a manicured finger on a picture of a smiling silver-haired couple playing shuffleboard. "It has a heated indoor pool, Elizabeth, a beautiful one, and social activities. Look, there's a book club, movie nights, even day trips to the coast. And the best part is, there's 24-hour nursing care on site. You won't have to worry about a single thing. Not cooking, not cleaning, not the stairs, nothing." She looked expectantly at Thomas, a silent command passing between them. He cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on a spot on the wall just over my left shoulder. He began reciting his lines, his voice flat and unconvincing. Dad would have wanted you to be safe, Mum. He worried. The house, it's just too much. The upkeep, the security, it's a full-time job." I looked from his face to hers. My son, his features slack with desperation, a puppet whose strings were being pulled so tightly they were about to snap, and his wife, her eyes gleaming with a predatory, triumphant light. The performance was flawless. But I could see the truth clear as day. This wasn't about care. It wasn't about safety. It was an eviction notice, gift-wrapped in fake concern. A lifetime of suppressed rage, of swallowed words and bitten-back retorts, of quiet, seething compliance, began to stir deep within me. It was a sleeping giant, and they were prodding it with a stick. For 50 years I had deferred, I had acquiesced, I had made myself small to accommodate the colossal ego of Richard Vance. I had believed it was my duty. Now I saw it for what it was, a long, slow erasure of self, and they expected me to simply allow them to finish the job. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the flicker of uncertainty that crossed Chloe's face. My passivity was part of their plan. My silence was not. When I finally spoke, my voice was dangerously calm, devoid of the hysteria or grief they had anticipated. "And the house?" Chloe's smile returned, wider this time, a flash of perfectly white teeth. She had mistaken my calm for surrender. "Oh, we'll handle it," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Don't you worry about that. Selling it will more than cover the cost of your stay at Golden Meadows. Indefinitely. It's the perfect solution. It will fund your care and secure the family's future. Our future. She reached into a sleek leather portfolio that had been resting by her chair and pulled out a sheaf of papers, held together with a pristine binder clip. She placed them on the coffee table next to the brochure. The top page was a power of attorney authorization. "The papers are already drawn up," she said, her voice bright and final. "We just need your signature, right here." She tapped the line at the bottom of the page. The ultimatum hung in the air, as cold and as hard as the glass walls that surrounded us. Sign away your home, your life, your last bastion of independence. Or what? They didn't say. They didn't have to.
The threat was implicit. Comply, or we will make you.
I looked down at the paper, at the black line waiting for my name. The final nail in the coffin of Elizabeth Vance. And in that moment, the ember of my anger roared into a silent, all-consuming flame. The verdict had been delivered, but the trial was just beginning, and they had no idea who was about to take the stand. That night, sleep was not a refuge. It was a courtroom where the past was the sole prosecutor, and Elizabeth was the only one on trial. The darkness behind her eyelids swirled and coalesced into a memory so sharp, so saturated with colour it felt more real than the waking world. She was young again, standing on a cliffside somewhere in Portugal, the Atlantic wind whipping her hair across her face. Richard stood beside her, his arms slung around her shoulders for the camera a local fisherman was holding. It was their honeymoon. In the photograph which had sat on their mantelpiece for 50 years, they looked like the perfect couple, bronzed and smiling, the future an endless expanse of blue sky and sea. But the dream didn't stop at the click of the shutter. The dream remembered what the photograph could not. It remembered the moment the fisherman had lowered the camera, the moment Richard's smile vanished, as if it had been a mask he'd ripped off. His fingers, which had been resting gently on her shoulder, tightened into a vice, the pressure sharp and shocking against her thin summer dress. He'd leaned in, his breath smelling of salt and wine, his voice a low growl that was swallowed by the roaring surf, meant only for her. "Look at this," he'd whispered, gesturing to the magnificent crashing waves, the endless sky. "It's all mine, and so are you. You exist because I allow it. You breathe this air because I approve of it. Never, ever forget that." Elizabeth woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The room was cold, steeped in the pre-dawn gloom, but a phantom heat radiated from her upper arm, the ghost of his grip still imprinted on her skin after half a century. The pain was real. It had always been real. She sat up, clutching her arm, the thin silk of her nightgown feeling as fragile as her own history. This was her truth. The life she had lived was not one of partnership, but of ownership. She had been his most prized possession, a beautiful object to be displayed at dinner parties and charity galas, polished and maintained but never consulted. Her opinions were treated as charming little novelties, like a child's drawing, to be acknowledged with a condescending pat on the head and then promptly ignored. Her spirit, once as bright and untamed as that Portuguese sea, had been slowly, methodically eroded by a constant, grinding psychological warfare. There were no bruises to show, no police reports to file. The abuse was quieter, more insidious. It was the way he'd balanced the checkbook at the dining room table, making her account for every dollar spent on groceries as if she were a clumsy employee. It was the way he'd dismiss her thoughts on politics or art with a curt, "You wouldn't understand, darling." It was the constant, unspoken reminder that without him, she was nothing. A pretty face with no substance, a woman who had been plucked from obscurity and given a life she could never have earned on her own. And her children. They had seen none of it. How could they? To Thomas and his sister Caroline, who had passed years ago, Richard was a titan. He was the provider, the unwavering pillar of strength who built their world. They saw the grand house, the expensive cars, the effortless power he projected. They never saw the man who, once the front door closed, would belittle their mother for burning the toast, his voice dripping with a disappointment so profound it could curdle milk. They never saw the look of cold fury in his eyes when she dared to buy a dress without his explicit approval. He had built a fortress of perception around them, and from their gilded parapets their mother looked small and passive, a quiet, contented consort to their king. A wave of nausea washed over Elizabeth as a new, chilling clarity settled in her mind. Chloe. She wasn't an anomaly. She wasn't some uniquely monstrous force that had invaded their lives. Chloe was simply the next in line. She was the inheritor of Richard's legacy of control, a cruder, more transparent version of the same tyranny. Richard had used psychological chains invisible but unbreakable. Chloe used blunt instruments, threats, ultimatums, the cold, hard logic of a real estate transaction. The goal was the same, to render Elizabeth powerless, to remove her from the equation. For a moment, a lifetime of ingrained submission made her question herself. Had she been too weak? Should she have fought back sooner? The thought was a bitter pill, but she spat it out. Fought back with what? He controlled every scent, every social connection, every narrative about their lives. Fighting him would have been like a single drop of rain trying to fight the ocean. She had survived. That was her victory, a quiet, desperate one she had clung to in the silent hours of the night for 50 years. But survival was no longer enough. The war wasn't over. The theatre of operations had just shifted. The enemy no longer slept beside her. Now, the enemy sat in her living room, drinking her tea and planning her eviction. A new feeling began to uncoil in the pit of her stomach. It was cold, sharp, and entirely unfamiliar. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger she had sometimes felt and quickly suppressed. This was different. It was a slow, burning, icy fury. A fury that didn't scream, but calculated. A fury that didn't want to break things, but to dismantle them, piece by piece. Richard had taught her that power wasn't about shouting. It was about control. And for the first time in her life, Elizabeth Vance felt a flicker of desire to take control. Fueled by this cold, nascent rage, she swung her legs out of bed. The floorboards were cool beneath her bare feet as she walked, not to the kitchen for a calming cup of tea, but down the hall, towards the one room in the house that had always been off-limits. Richard's office. She had been inside it, of course, on the rare occasions he'd summoned her, but she had never truly entered it. It was his sanctuary, his throne room, a place so saturated with his presence that even now, days after his death, it felt like he was still there, watching. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, expensive leather, and the faint, lingering aroma of his cigars, a smell she had always hated. The room was a shrine to his ego. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves were filled with leather-bound volumes of engineering texts, architectural history, and biographies of powerful men. A massive polished desk stood like an altar in the centre of the room, its surface clear except for a single ornate penholder and a blotter. It was the desk of a man who tolerated no clutter, no chaos, no imperfection. She wasn't looking for his will. She knew what it said, a final, cruel masterstroke of control. He had left everything jointly to her and Thomas, tying them together, ensuring she could do nothing without her son's signature, a son who was now firmly under Chloe's thumb. No, she wasn't looking for a document that confirmed her powerlessness. She was looking for the source of his power. She was looking for its engine. His financial secrets. Her eyes scanned the room, the meticulous order of it all. A man like Richard wouldn't leave his secrets in a simple filing cabinet. He was an architect, a builder. He thought in terms of hidden structures and false facades. Her gaze fell on the largest bookcase, the one that housed his collection of first edition biographies. It seemed too solid, too perfect. She ran her hands along the carved wooden trim, pressing gently, feeling for a loose panel, a hidden latch. Nothing. She pulled out a few heavy books, her fingers tracing the wall behind them. Still nothing. Doubt began to creep in. What was she even doing? This was insane. She was a 75-year-old widow snooping in her dead husband's office like a character in a cheap detective novel. Chloe and Thomas would be up soon. What if they found her? The humiliation would be unbearable. She could almost hear Richard's voice, dripping with contempt. Prying, Elizabeth. So unseemly. She was about to give up, to retreat back to the familiar prison of her bedroom when her fingers brushed against a section of the ornate moulding at the base of the bookshelf. It felt different. Not loose, but hollow. It wasn't a button or a switch. It was a joint, cut with an architect's precision. She pushed harder, not down, but sideways. There was a soft, satisfying click. And a section of the bookshelf, books and all, swung silently inward, revealing a dark, narrow cavity within the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected a safe, a metal box with a combination lock. But there was no safe. Instead, the space was neatly filled with a series of antique-looking leather-bound ledgers, standing upright like soldiers on parade. There were a dozen of them, maybe more, in varying shades of brown and black. They looked like innocuous accounting books from a bygone era, the kind a small-town shopkeeper might have used a century ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached in and pulled one out. She opened it. The pages were filled with neat, spidery handwriting, Richard's handwriting. Columns of figures, names of corporations, dates, legitimate business dealings from his early career. She pulled out another, the same. This was his public history, the meticulous record of the empire he had built. It was all there, just as he would have wanted the world to see it. She was about to slide the panel shut, a wave of disappointment washing over her, when her eye caught something at the very back of the hidden compartment. It was smaller than the others, and it was the only one not bound in brown or black leather. This one was a deep, dark green, the colour of a stormy sea. It felt different in her hands. The leather was softer, more supple. There was no title embossed on the cover, no gold leaf lettering. It was completely anonymous. With a sense of both dread and purpose, she opened it. The paper was heavy, creamy, but the pages were not filled with names and figures she recognized. They were filled with codes, strange symbols, alphanumeric strings, columns of numbers that didn't seem to add up, and dates stretching back over 30 years. There were no names of clients, no company letterheads, just this cryptic, meticulous script. A chill snaked its way up her spine. This was it. This was the real ledger. This was the engine room. She closed the book, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the silent office. She held in her hands the secret heart of Richard Vance, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified and exhilarated her, that her life was about to change forever. She couldn't decipher this alone. The codes were a foreign language, a secret dialect spoken only by Richard and whoever was on the other end of these transactions. Her mind raced. A lawyer? An accountant? No, that would be too risky. It would mean trusting a stranger. Someone who could be bought. Someone who might have their own loyalties. She needed someone smart, someone she could trust implicitly, and someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. The answer came to her with sudden, piercing clarity.
Leo, her grandson, Chloe and Thomas's son, a brilliant, slightly awkward 20-year-old computer science major at Oregon State. He lived and breathed code, seeing the world in algorithms and systems. More importantly, he loved his grandmother. He was the one member of the family who still looked at her without a trace of pity or condescension, who would sit with her and patiently explain how to use her new tablet or listen to her stories about the old days. He had Thomas's soft heart, but none of his weakness, and thankfully none of Chloe's avarice. But could she risk involving him? What if Thomas found out? She paced the length of her bedroom, the green ledger clutched to her chest like a prayer book. The risk was enormous. But the alternative, doing nothing, surrendering to Chloe's plan, was no longer an option. She had to trust him. She would have to play a role, the one she had perfected over decades, the slightly confused, technologically inept old woman. It was a mask, just like Richard's smile, and now she would learn to use it. She picked up her phone, her fingers surprisingly steady as she dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and a little sleepy. "Grandma, is everything okay?" "Leo, darling, I'm so sorry to call so early," she began, carefully pitching her voice to sound frail and flustered. "I hope I didn't wake you." No, I was up, just cramming for a midterm. What's up?" "Oh, it's just... Well, you know I've been trying to sort through your grandfather's things, and it's all so overwhelming." She let out a small, tired sigh. "I've found some of his very old business books from before computers were really a thing. I was trying to make sense of them, but I think it must be some sort of archaic accounting software. But the file is corrupted or something. The numbers just don't make any sense." She paused, letting the bait hang in the air. "I know you're so terribly busy, but I was wondering, could you possibly help your old grandma make sense of these columns? You're just so clever with these things." There was a moment of silence on the other end, and she held her breath. "Of course, Grandma," he said, his voice full of genuine affection. "I can try. Can you send me a picture of it?" "Oh, you're a lifesaver, dear." "Yes, I'll try to get a clear photo with my tablet." After they hung up, she moved with methodical precision. She took the green ledger back into Richard's office, the only room with the right morning light. She carefully selected a page from the middle of the book, one that looked particularly dense with code, but had no obvious starting or ending point. Using her tablet, she took several high-resolution photos, ensuring every symbol was sharp and clear. Then she composed an email. "Here it is, dear. See what you can make of this nonsense. Love, Grandma." She hit send and the message disappeared into the digital ether. The next hour was the longest of her life. She made coffee, the familiar ritual doing little to soothe the frantic thrumming in her veins. She sat in the kitchen, staring at the phone, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying her anxiety. What if he found nothing? What if it was all just meaningless scribbles, the paranoid delusions of a powerful man? Or worse, what if he understood it immediately and called his father? What if this was the move that backfired spectacularly, proving to Chloe and Thomas that she was in fact senile and needed to be put in a home for her own good? The phone buzzed on the countertop, making her jump. It was Leo. She answered, her mouth suddenly dry. "Leo?" "Grandma, this is bizarre."
He sounded different. The warmth was gone, replaced by a tone of intense academic fascination mixed with confusion. I've been running some pattern analysis on the images you sent. This isn't corrupted software. It's not a software file at all. It's a physical ledger, obviously. But the system it's using, it's brilliant. And it's terrifying. What do you mean, dear? She asked, keeping her voice level. It's a double-entry ledger, the basis of all accounting, he explained, talking faster now, the way he did when he was excited about a problem. But it's been twisted. It's structured like a shell game, a magic trick. Money, or some kind of value unit, moves from one coded account, let's call it account A, to another, account B. But then a corresponding amount is debited from an entirely different coded account, account C, and credited to another, account D. The transactions are all linked by these weird symbols, not dates. The result is that you see movement, you see activity, but the net total always appears to balance out to zero. The money never accumulates in any one place. It just vanishes from the system. Grandma, whatever this is, it looks like a system designed for making money disappear. Elizabeth sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against her ear. The truth, when it finally arrived, didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from her lungs. Disappear. The word echoed in the silent kitchen. Richard wasn't just a controlling husband or a demanding father. He wasn't just a bully, he was a thief, a high-level, sophisticated embezzler. The beautiful house she was sitting in, the trust fund Thomas and Chloe were so eager to plunder, the very foundation of their family's wealth and status. It was all a lie. A magnificent 50-year lie built on stolen money. She was the queen of a criminal enterprise she never even knew existed. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a strange, galvanizing cold. This changed everything. This wasn't just her fight anymore. She looked at the green ledger, now sitting on her kitchen table. It wasn't just a record of sins. It was a weapon, a bomb, and she was the only one who knew how to detonate it. Her next call would not be to a grandson. It would be to a ghost from Richard's past. There was only one person she could think of, one name that surfaced from the murky depths of her memory. Arthur Finch. He had been Richard's law partner in the early days, a brilliant litigator with a conscience, a combination that had ultimately made their partnership untenable. They had a falling out, a bitter one, some 35 years ago. Richard had been vague about the details, dismissing Arthur as ethically inflexible and lacking ambition, which Elizabeth now understood was Richard's code for unwilling to be corrupt. Arthur had retired years ago, but she had seen his name on the board of a local historical society. She found his number online. Calling him felt like a monumental risk. He was a piece of Richard's world, a world she now knew was built on criminality. But he was also the man who had walked away from it. That had to count for something. She met him at a quiet, old-fashioned cafe downtown, a place with dark wood panelling and worn leather booths, a place that absorbed secrets. Arthur was older now. He looked at the book, then at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. He opened it. For a long moment, he just stared at the first page of coded entries. He turned a page, then another. The friendly, sympathetic look on his face slowly dissolved, replaced by a mask of stunned recognition, then dawning horror. The colour drained from his face, leaving it pale and papery.
He looked like he had seen a ghost. In a way, he had. "My God," he whispered, tracing one of the symbols with a trembling finger. He actually did it. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of the man. "What is it, Arthur?" Elizabeth pressed, her voice urgent. "What does it mean?" He looked up from the ledger, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. It was a mixture of awe and terror. "Elizabeth, this is—" "I always suspected Richard's ambition far outpaced his ethics. That's why I left the firm. He wanted to take on clients, do things. I couldn't stomach it. But I thought it was just cutting corners, aggressive tax avoidance. I never imagined this." He gestured to the book. "This is a criminal enterprise, a masterpiece of it. These codes aren't just shell corporations or bank accounts. I recognize the structure. It's a system he proposed to me once, in theory, a way to launder money. He called it financial architecture. I called it a one-way ticket to a federal indictment and walked out the door." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "These symbols here, they're not just random. They're his clients. He wasn't just investing their money. He was systematically bleeding them dry, siphoning off percentages into this ghost system. For decades. He built your entire world on the ruins of other people's fortunes." The weight of his words settled on Elizabeth, heavy and suffocating. She felt a strange, detached calm, the kind that comes in the eye of a hurricane. Then Arthur looked at her, his expression shifting from shock to grim, terrifying urgency. "Elizabeth, listen to me very carefully. Your children, Thomas, Chloe, they don't know about this, do they?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Thank God," he breathed. "Because if they inherit this estate and try to access these funds, if their names get attached to these accounts in any way, they are no longer innocent heirs. They become accomplices. The moment they touch this money, they are part of a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. This ledger," he tapped the green leather cover with a sharp, definitive rap, "isn't a key to a fortune. It's Exhibit A in a federal prosecution. It's a one-way ticket to prison, Elizabeth. For them." He let that sink in before delivering the final, devastating blow. "And you, sitting here with this book, are in immense danger, not just from your family, who want to take what they think is theirs. You're in danger from the consequences of what he's done. This book is proof that the Vance fortune is poison, and right now, you're the only one holding the antidote." The icy grip of fear, the kind that had been a constant, low hum beneath the floorboards of her life for 50 years, held her for 24 hours after leaving Arthur's office. It was a suffocating, paralyzing cold. She felt it in her bones, a phantom chill left over from Richard's long shadow. She imagined his disapproval, his booming voice telling her she was a fool, that she was nothing without him, that she only existed because he allowed it. But on the second day, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish. It did something far more useful. It froze solid. It became a diamond-hard core of resolve in the center of her chest. The cold was still there, but now it was the cold of a glacier, immense and unstoppable. She was no longer afraid of the dark. She was becoming the dark. She sat in Richard's library, the one place she had rarely been allowed to simply be. The scent of old paper and leather, once intimidating, now felt like armor. She picked up the phone, her hand steady, and dialed the number Arthur had given her. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Eleanor Vance, please." Elizabeth took a breath. "This is she?" "Mrs. Vance, this is Marcus Thorne. Arthur Finch contacted me. He said you might be in touch. How can I help you?" His voice was calm, devoid of pity or condescension. It was the voice of a surgeon, precise and focused.
Mr. Thorne, Elizabeth began, her own voice sounding surprisingly firm in the quiet room. I have a number of assets, held solely in my name. I need to liquidate them, all of them, as quickly and as discreetly as possible. I understand. Arthur gave me the broad strokes. A portfolio of blue-chip stocks and some artwork? Yes, my late husband. He called it my sentimental nonsense. He bought the stocks for me on our 10th anniversary, not as a gift, but to prove a point about the market. He lost interest soon after. The art, pieces I bought at local fairs over the years, he never saw any value in them.
She could almost hear Richard's dismissive laugh. Little trinkets for a little mind. From downstairs she heard Chloe's voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the silence. Thomas, no, not that shade of grage. It's too provincial. We need something that screams understated wealth. I saw a perfect finish on Zillow. It's called Whispering Angel. We'll need to get the contractors in to give us a quote for the entire kitchen and the master bath. The equity is just sitting here. We have to unlock it. Elizabeth closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It was fuel. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The funds need to be invisible. Arthur mentioned a blind trust. He did. I've already drawn up the preliminary framework for your approval. We can title it anything you wish. Once the assets are sold, the proceeds will be wired directly into accounts held by the trust. You will be the sole unnamed beneficiary. To anyone looking, the money will simply cease to be attached to Elizabeth Vance. Good, she said. That is exactly what I need. I can begin the stock liquidation immediately, Marcus said. We'll sell in small staggered blocks to avoid flagging any institutional attention. The art may take a bit longer. An auction house would be too public. I have a network of private collectors who value discretion above all else. Do it, Elizabeth said, whatever it takes. As she hung up, Thomas's softer, defeated voice drifted up the stairs. Chloe, don't you think we should wait? It feels fast. Fast is how you get ahead, Tommy, Chloe's voice snapped back. Your father understood that. It's a shame he never taught you. Now, are you going to help me measure for the new wine fridge or not? Elizabeth looked around the library. Richard's world. His books, his desk, his suffocating presence. She ran a hand along a leather-bound volume of Stoic philosophy he'd often quoted but never embodied. For 50 years she had tiptoed around this house, around his moods, around his very existence. Now, Chloe was striding through it like a conqueror, measuring for her new life on the bones of Elizabeth's old one. But they were both looking at the house. They were fighting over the cage. They had no idea she was quietly forging the key. Over the next 2 weeks, while Chloe auditioned contractors and ordered fabric swatches, Elizabeth's war chest grew. Marcus Thorne was as good as his word. He was a ghost, a whisper in the financial markets. Chunks of her life were sold off, converted into silent, powerful numbers in an account she couldn't see, but whose existence she felt like a heartbeat. The blue-chip stocks Richard had bought to humiliate a rival broker. A small, vibrant landscape by a forgotten local artist that she'd always loved because it depicted the sea. A set of first editions she'd collected before her marriage. Each sale was a small death and a profound rebirth. Arthur had created a shell corporation for her, a deliberately dull name registered in Delaware. Bedrock Holdings, LLC. It sounded solid, unremarkable, and utterly anonymous. Through Bedrock, they made their first move. Golden Meadows is a family-owned business, Arthur explained, sitting opposite her in his sunlit office, a place that was fast becoming her sanctuary. The Patterson family. They've run it for 2 generations. They're tired. They want to retire to Florida. Their children have no interest in taking over. They're motivated sellers. Elizabeth nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. What is our offer? We've reviewed their books. They're sound but not spectacular. It's a modest, respectable operation. We're going to make a cash offer, 15% above their private valuation. It's generous, more than fair. It shows we're serious, and it allows them a clean, fast exit. No financing contingencies, no delays, just a wire transfer and a handshake.
They'll take it, Elizabeth said, more as a statement of will than a question. I believe they will, Arthur agreed. He submitted the offer that afternoon. For 3 days the silence was agonizing. Elizabeth found herself pacing the length of the garden, her steps tracing the same worn path her entire adult life. She was checking her email every hour, a habit she'd never had before. The world had shrunk to the size of her phone screen, waiting for a single message. On the 4th day, Arthur called. His voice was tight. We have a problem, Elizabeth. Her heart sank. They rejected it. No, worse. They received another offer, a much higher one. From whom? She asked, her throat dry. A healthcare conglomerate, a big one. Evergreen Senior Solutions. They've been buying up smaller, independent facilities all over the country for the past 5 years. They're aggressive. Their offer is 30% above valuation, all cash, just like ours.
They want to close in 2 weeks. Elizabeth slumped into a chair. It felt like hitting a brick wall at full speed. A conglomerate. She was a ghost with a modest war chest. They were an army with bottomless resources. Can we counter? We can, Arthur said carefully. But it will exhaust nearly everything you have. And they can likely just outbid us again. These companies don't like to lose. For them, it's not about one facility. It's about market dominance. They crush competition. The phone rang in her pocket that evening. It was Thomas. Her finger hovered over the screen. She didn't want to answer. She forced herself to. Hello, Thomas. Hi, Mum, he said, his voice strained with false cheerfulness. Just calling with some good news. She heard Chloe whisper something in the background. Get to the point. We finalized everything with Golden Meadows, Thomas continued, stumbling over the words as if reading from a script. Your suite is confirmed. It's a lovely room. Corner unit, gets the afternoon sun. Chloe and I went to see it. We think you'll be very comfortable. We've scheduled the move-in for the end of the month, the 28th. Elizabeth said nothing. The silence stretched, becoming a weapon. Mum? Are you there? Then Chloe's voice came on the line, syrupy and triumphant. Elizabeth, we're so excited for you. This is the start of a whole new relaxing chapter. You've earned it. No more big empty house to worry about. No more stress. Just peace. The smug satisfaction in Chloe's voice was like a physical blow. It was the condescending tone of a victor dictating terms to the vanquished. And in that moment, the doubt, the fear, the feeling of being outmatched, it all burned away, replaced by a cold, clear rage. They weren't just putting her in a home, they were announcing her social death. And they were celebrating it. Thank you for letting me know, Elizabeth said, her voice a calm, level plane of ice. I'll be ready. She hung up before they could say another word. She looked at the phone in her hand, then walked directly to the library. The game had changed. They had a bigger army, more money. But she had something they didn't. She had Richard's sins. She had the ledger. She sat at Richard's desk, the green leather book open before her. Its pages were a cryptic map of a buried kingdom of crime. She knew the answer was in here.
She just didn't know the question to ask. She needed Leo. She called him the next morning. "Leo, my dear, it's your grandmother." "Grandma! Hey! How are you doing?" His voice was a welcome warmth in her cold new world. "I'm well, thank you. I was wondering if I could impose on you for your technical expertise again. It's this confounding old book of your grandfather's. The ledger. Did you find another puzzle?" he asked. His interest piqued. "I think so," she said, choosing her words with care. "I noticed something. There are certain transactions always paid out to accounts in the Cayman Islands, but next to them there's a recurring alphanumeric code. It's different from the project codes we looked at before. It doesn't seem to correspond to any of his architectural work. I thought perhaps it was another layer of organization." "A ghost signature," Leo said, excitement in his voice. "That's what we call it in data security, a hidden identifier. Can you read it to me?" She read the string of letters and numbers. She heard the furious clicking of his keyboard over the phone. "Okay, this is interesting," he said after a minute. "It's not random. It's a routing number, an old one, for a defunct financial management firm. Sterling Cross Asset Management. And the numbers, they're not just account numbers. They're pension fund identifiers. Specifically, the Midwest Allied Trades Pension Fund. Why on earth would Grandpa be making coded payments linked to a union pension fund? The name hit Elizabeth like a thunderclap. She remembered it. It had been in the news. A scandal. "Leo," she said slowly. "That fund, didn't it collapse about 10 years ago?" "Yeah, it did," he said. "Huge scandal. Wiped out the savings of thousands of workers. The guy who ran Sterling Cross, the fund manager, he got investigated, but they could never pin it on him. They ended up blaming some junior associate who took the fall, said he was a rogue trader. A lot of people thought the CEO got away with murder, financially speaking. Hang on, I'm looking him up now. CEO was a guy named Alistair Finch. No, wait, not Finch. Alistair Croft. After the scandal, he disappeared for a year, then re-emerged. Wow, he's the founder and CEO of Evergreen Senior Solutions." The world stopped. The air in the room grew thick and still. The unseen threads had suddenly been pulled taut, revealing a web that stretched from this dusty green book to a ruined pension fund, to the very company that was trying to buy her prison. Richard hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen from a fellow predator. And he'd been smart enough to keep the receipts. "Leo," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You have been an immense help. Thank you." "Any time, Grandma. It's a fascinating puzzle. Grandpa was a real piece of work, wasn't he?" "You have no idea," she whispered after she'd hung up. She immediately called Arthur. She didn't explain the details over the phone. "Arthur, I need to see you. I found our leverage." In his office, she laid it out. The ledger, the code, the name Alistair Croft, the collapsed pension fund. Arthur listened, his expression growing more grim with every word. When she was finished, he sat back, steepling his fingers. "My God, Elizabeth," he breathed. Richard wasn't just a shark, he was a leviathan. He didn't just embezzle from Croft's fund. It seems he siphoned off enough to destabilize it, then covered his tracks by framing a subordinate. Croft survived, but Richard held the proof that could not only ruin him, but send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. "And now Croft is trying to buy Golden Meadows," she said. "He has no idea who is on the other side of the bid," Arthur murmured.
a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He thinks he's in a simple business transaction with an anonymous holding company. "What do we do?" Elizabeth asked. Arthur leaned forward. "We don't make a threat. We don't make a demand. A man like Croft would react poorly to being blackmailed. He would fight. We simply share a piece of information, a reminder of a past he believes is buried forever." He swiveled to his computer. He had his firm's encrypted email service open in seconds. "We will send this from a secure, untraceable server. It will go directly to his personal email, the one his lawyers manage." "What do we send?" "The bare minimum," Arthur said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. And then he attached a high-resolution scan of a single line from the ledger, the line showing a transfer to an offshore account with the alphanumeric code for the pension fund next to it. In the body of the email, he typed only two things: the date of the transaction and the account number. Nothing else. No greeting, no sign-off. Just cold, hard data. A single, perfect thread from his past. He looked at her. "Ready?" She nodded. He hit send. The next 24 hours were the longest of Elizabeth's life. She didn't sleep. She sat in the library, the green ledger closed on the desk in front of her, and she waited. The house was silent. Chloe and Thomas were out, likely celebrating their impending victory. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind outside the window felt like a judgment. Had she gone too far? What if Croft didn't back down? What if he came after her? The old fear, the conditioned passivity of a lifetime tried to reassert itself. She felt small, old, and foolish. A widow playing a game far out of her league. But then she would look at the ledger. It was more than a book of crimes. It was a testament to a lifetime of silent observation. She had watched Richard for 50 years. She knew how he thought, how he intimidated, how he controlled. She knew that the greatest threats were the ones left unsaid. She was using his own weapon, refined and perfected. The call came at 3:15 p.m. the next day. It was Arthur. She answered on the first ring, her heart pounding. "Elizabeth," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "It's done." "What happened?" she whispered. "We just received a formal notification. Evergreen Senior Solutions has officially withdrawn their bid for the Golden Meadows property. The reason cited was unforeseen strategic realignments." Elizabeth closed her eyes as a wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over her. It was so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. She had done it. She had faced a giant, and with a single well-aimed stone she had made him turn and walk away. "The Patterson family has accepted our original offer," Arthur continued. "The sale should be finalised by the end of next week. Congratulations, Elizabeth. You are about to become the new owner of Golden Meadows Senior Living." The signing took place in Arthur's office a week later. There was no fanfare. It was a quiet, solemn affair. Just Elizabeth, Arthur, and a stack of documents. She picked up the pen, its weight feeling significant, monumental. As she signed her name on the final document, the transfer of ownership, the pen made a soft, scratching sound on the thick paper. It was the quietest earthquake imaginable, a seismic shift of power that no one else on earth could feel. She wasn't Elizabeth Vance, the grieving widow being shuffled off to a home. She was Elizabeth Vance, the proprietor, the landlady, the house. That evening, back in her silent library, she allowed herself a small indulgence. She opened her laptop and went to Chloe's Facebook page. There was a new post from an hour ago. It was a selfie of Chloe and Thomas, their heads pressed together, beaming at the camera.
Thomas's smile was weak, forced. Chloe's was radiant with triumph. The caption read, "Finalizing the last details for Mom's big move. So excited for her to start this new, relaxing chapter at Golden Meadows. It's so important to care for our elders and make sure they're safe and happy in their golden years. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family first, hashtag family love, hashtag making memories." The comments were a waterfall of praise. "You two are such a wonderful son and daughter-in-law. Your mum is so lucky to have you. This is so selfless, an inspiration. Chloe, you have a heart of gold." Elizabeth read every single one. She looked at the photograph of her son, his eyes hollow behind the smile. She looked at Chloe's smug, self-congratulatory expression. A slow smile spread across her own face. It was not a smile of malice or vengeance. It was the serene, knowing smile of a playwright watching the actors take their places, completely unaware of the final act she had written for them. The stage was set, the trap was laid, and check-in day was just around the corner. The day arrived with a cruel, indifferent brightness, the kind of sun that bleaches the sky and offers no real warmth. Thomas drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of the family sedan. The silence inside the car was a physical thing, thick and heavy, pressing in on them. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence of a held breath, of words caught in the throat. Beside him, Chloe was a stark contrast, practically vibrating with a manic energy. She had dressed for an occasion, a floral dress that seemed too loud for the quiet car, her makeup perfect, a predatory smile fixed on her lips. She was the victor, and she was going to enjoy her parade. Elizabeth sat in the back, watching the familiar suburban streets give way to the manicured arterials of the wealthier counties. She looked out the window, but she wasn't seeing the scenery. She was seeing the last 50 years spool out behind her like a dark ribbon unwinding on the road. Every stoplight, every turn was a small death. Another step away from the life she had known, however suffocating it had been. The house was already gone in her mind. It had been sold the moment Chloe had whispered in her ear at Richard's funeral. This trip was just the final, humiliating paperwork. "Oh, look, Elizabeth!" Chloe chirped, her voice slicing through the tension. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger out the window. "There's the golf course they told us about. The members have a special discount, you know. You could take up golf. It's never too late to learn a new hobby." Elizabeth didn't answer. She simply watched the blur of perfect green grass. A hobby, as if her life were a blank page, waiting for a pleasant pastime to be penciled in. Thomas flinched at his wife's tone, a small, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He kept his eyes glued to the road, a willing pilot flying his mother into exile. He hadn't met her gaze once all morning. Not when he'd carried her single suitcase to the car, not when he'd held the door for her. He was a ghost, haunted by a weakness he couldn't bear to confront. "And the sign! We're here!" Chloe announced, her voice rising with triumph. "Golden Meadows Senior Living. It doesn't even sound like a home, does it? It sounds like a resort." It did. The entrance was flanked by towering cypress trees and beds of aggressively cheerful marigolds. A large, tastefully designed sign
sat nestled in a bed of pristine white rocks. The place didn't whisper of quiet dignity in one's final years. It screamed of expensive, curated oblivion. As Thomas guided the car down the winding driveway, Chloe continued her tour guide monologue. "There's the bingo hall. Margaret from the club said their bingo nights are legendary. And that building there, that's the Arts and Crafts Centre. They do pottery, painting. You'll make so many new friends, Elizabeth. It'll be a whole new chapter for you." A chapter written by someone else, Elizabeth thought. A final chapter in a book she hadn't been allowed to author. The car pulled to a stop under a grand portico. In front of glass doors that slid open automatically, a young man in a crisp uniform stepped forward to open Elizabeth's door. Chloe was already out, beaming as if she were arriving at a society gala. "We're the Vance party," she announced to the doorman, who simply smiled and nodded. "Checking in my mother-in-law." The lobby was an explosion of beige and gold, a soaring ceiling, a discreetly bubbling fountain in the centre, plush armchairs arranged in conversational pits that no one was using. It smelled of lemon polish and money. Behind a long, curved reception desk of polished marble, a young woman with a headset and a brilliant smile looked up. "Welcome to Golden Meadows," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "How may I help you?" "Chloe Vance," Chloe said, leaning possessively on the counter. "My husband Thomas and my mother-in-law Elizabeth Vance. We have a 10 o'clock check-in appointment." She said the word check-in as if it were a hotel reservation, a temporary stay, a vacation. The receptionist typed something into her computer, her smile never faltering. "Ah, yes, the Vance party. We've been expecting you." She paused, her eyes flicking from Chloe to Thomas, and finally resting on Elizabeth, who stood silently, her purse held in both hands, a statue of frail composure. "There's been a slight change in the standard procedure for you today. The new owner would like to meet with you personally to finalize the paperwork." Chloe preened. Her smile widened, a flash of smug satisfaction in her eyes. "The owner? Well, of course. I imagine they want to personally welcome a family of our stature. It's a sign of good management, don't you think, Thomas?" Thomas just nodded, looking deeply uncomfortable, his gaze fixed on a bland, abstract painting on the far wall. He wanted this to be over. He wanted to sign the papers, deposit his mother, and drive away, leaving his conscience behind in the perfumed air of the lobby. "Of course," the receptionist said, her smile now holding a hint of something else, something Elizabeth couldn't quite place. It wasn't deference, it was anticipation. "If you'll please follow me. It's not in the usual admissions office. The owner is waiting for you in the main director's suite." "Lead the way," Chloe said, giving Elizabeth's arm a patronizing pat. "See? VIP treatment already." They followed the receptionist away from the main lobby, down a wide, carpeted corridor. The plushness of the carpet absorbed the sound of their footsteps, creating an unnerving silence. The walls were lined with expensive, generic art, seascapes and floral still lifes. It was a hallway designed to soothe, but for Elizabeth every step was a drumbeat, counting down to the final surrender. Chloe kept up a running commentary, pointing out the library, the small movie theatre, her voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. Thomas walked a half-step behind, a silent, hulking shadow of regret. They stopped before a set of imposing double doors, made of dark mahogany. A small brass plaque read, "Executive Director." The receptionist knocked once, a soft, respectful rap. A voice from within, A voice that was calm and clear and utterly familiar called out, "Come in." Chloe's face was a mask of triumphant expectation. She thought she was about to be congratulated for her cleverness, for securing her inheritance. She thought she was about to be lauded for her compassionate, if ruthless, efficiency. The receptionist opened one of the heavy doors and held it for them, gesturing them inside. "Avance party, as requested," she said into the room. Then she stepped back, pulling the door quietly shut behind them, leaving the three of them alone. The room was magnificent. A wall of glass looked out onto a private rose garden, the flowers in full decadent bloom. The furniture was heavy, expensive leather and polished wood. A thick Persian rug covered the floor. It was a room that radiated power, control, and absolute authority. And sitting behind the massive mahogany desk, in a high-backed leather chair that looked like a throne, was Elizabeth. She wasn't wearing the muted, mournful colours of a grieving widow. She wasn't wearing the tired, defeated expression of a woman being forced into a nursing home. She was wearing a tailored pantsuit of deep charcoal grey, the kind of suit a CEO would wear to close a hostile takeover. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed. Her expression was serene, calm, and as unreadable as ancient stone. In the centre of the desk, placed squarely between her folded hands, was the green leather ledger. Time seemed to stop. The air in the room became thick, heavy, unbreathable. Chloe froze mid-stride, her triumphant smile collapsing as if it had been struck. Her brain struggled to process the image before her, a cognitive dissonance so profound it left her speechless. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. "Mom?" Thomas whispered, the sound barely audible. He looked from the woman behind the desk to Chloe, his face a canvas of pure confusion. What is this?" Chloe finally managed. Her voice a reedy squawk. "Elizabeth? What are you doing in here? Get up from there. This is ridiculous. We have paperwork to sign." She started to move forward, her ingrained sense of command trying to reassert itself. Elizabeth didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She simply lifted a single elegant hand and gestured to the two plush leather chairs opposite the desk. "Sit down, Thomas. Chloe." Her voice was not the voice of the woman they had put in the car. It was a different instrument entirely. It was quiet, but it was layered with something they had never heard from her before. It was steel. It was bedrock. It was final. The command was so absolute, so unexpected, that they obeyed without thinking. Thomas sank into one chair, his large frame seeming to shrink. Chloe, after a moment's hesitation, perched rigidly on the edge of the other, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. Elizabeth let the silence stretch, letting them absorb the impossible reality of the situation. She watched the panic begin to dawn in Chloe's eyes, the dawning horror that she had walked willingly into a trap she couldn't comprehend. When Elizabeth spoke again, her voice was calm, conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Welcome to my facility," she said, a faint ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I trust your journey was comfortable. I bought it last week. The deal closed on Tuesday." Chloe stared, her face turning a pale, waxy colour. You what? That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. Richard controlled everything." "Richard controlled many things," Elizabeth agreed, her eyes holding Chloe's gaze without blinking. "He was very, very good at control. But he made one mistake.
He underestimated the person he locked in the cage with him for 50 years. He thought I was just part of the decor. He never imagined I was listening. She let that sink in before she slowly, deliberately, pushed the green leather ledger across the polished surface of the desk. It slid to a stop directly in front of Chloe. The book sat there, inert, but radiating a palpable menace. "Your inheritance," Elizabeth said, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming harder, colder. "The house, the stocks, the offshore accounts, the life you were so eager to claim. It's a lie, all of it."
Chloe glanced down at the book, then back up, a flicker of her old defiance returning.
"What are you talking about? This is a joke, a pathetic, senile fantasy. Thomas, tell her!"
Thomas said nothing. He was staring at the ledger as if it were a venomous snake. He recognized his father's precise, angular handwriting on the small label on its spine.
"Your father,"
Elizabeth continued, her gaze shifting to her son, and for the first time there was a flicker of something that might have been sorrow, a deep, ancient pain.
"was a criminal, a brilliant one, I'll grant him that, but a thief nonetheless. This book, and the others like it that are now in a very secure location, details 30 years of fraud, racketeering, and embezzlement. He built our entire life on the ruins of other people's finances. He laundered money for men whose names would make headlines for a month. He was a predator, disguised as an architect." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into Chloe. "The Vance legacy you're so proud of is a house of cards built on a foundation of pure filth. This book is the blueprint. It's a confession written in code. A code that thankfully my grandson was able to break." The mention of Leo was like a physical blow. Chloe flinched. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The quiet, tech-savvy boy she'd always dismissed. The trap hadn't just been set, it had been meticulously engineered. "If I turn this ledger over to the FBI," Elizabeth stated, her voice now devoid of all emotion, a simple declaration of fact, "the Vance name will be synonymous with Bernie Madoff. The media will feast on you. Every friend you have, every connection you've cultivated will abandon you overnight. Your face, Chloe, will be on every news channel. Not as the grieving, dutiful daughter-in-law, but as the greedy accomplice to a dynasty of crime." She paused, letting the images paint themselves in their minds. "The federal government will seize everything. The house you want to sell will be a crime scene. Your bank accounts, every penny you think you have, will be frozen, pending an investigation that will last for years. And you, Thomas," she said, her voice softening, almost imperceptibly, as she looked at her son. "As Richard's direct heir, the one set to inherit this poisoned empire, will almost certainly face charges of conspiracy and racketeering. You didn't build it, but you were more than happy to live in it. And you were more than happy to throw me out of it to keep your place. The justice system will not be kind." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, shallow sound of Chloe's breathing. Her face had crumbled, the makeup, the perfect hair, the expensive dress. It was all a cheap costume on a terrified woman. The bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Thomas looked broken. His head bowed, his hands limp in his lap. He was a boy again, caught in a lie with no powerful father to save him. Elizabeth sat back in her chair, the leather sighing softly. She was in complete control. The power in the room had shifted so completely, so irrevocably, it had its own gravity. "So,
she said, her voice returning to its calm, measured tone. Here is the new arrangement. Not a negotiation, a statement of terms. She folded her hands on the desk again. First, you will immediately, as in today, sign a durable power of attorney, ceding complete and total control of all of Richard's assets, domestic and international, to a restitution trust. I will be the sole executor and manager of that trust. Its purpose will be to quietly and anonymously make amends to the people your father ruined. What is left after that, if anything, is of no concern to you. Second, you will live on a modest allowance, an amount that I, and I alone, will determine. It will be enough for groceries, gas, and essentials. It will not be enough for designer clothes, European vacations, or lunches at the country club. You will learn to live like normal people. Third, you will both continue to live in my house. She savoured the words. My house. You will not sell it. You will not leave it. You will remain there with me, maintaining the public illusion of a happy, supportive family. You will smile at neighbours. You will attend the necessary holiday gatherings. You will perform the part of a loving son and daughter-in-law. Your lives will become a pantomime of devotion, and I will be your audience. And fourth, she added, her eyes locking onto Chloe's, you will treat me with the respect I am owed, not the condescending pity you've shown me since Richard died, but genuine respect. You will speak to me when I speak to you. You will do as I ask. You are guests in my home, living on my charity. You will act accordingly. In two-top, dung so for all. She let the terms hang in the air, each one a bar in the new cage she was building around them. Susie outie furl. That is one option, she concluded, her voice softening to a near whisper. The other option is simple. You can stand up, walk out that door, and take your chances with the federal government. You can see how the Vance name holds up in a court of law. You can see how your friends react when the indictments are unsealed. The ledger stays with me, of course. The choice is entirely and immediately yours. She leaned back and waited. The power wasn't in the threats, it was in the choice. She was giving them the illusion of agency, the same illusion Richard had given her for 50 years. But she knew, and they knew, there was only one door out of this room that didn't lead to total annihilation. Chloe's face was a wreck of tear-streaked makeup. The fight had drained out of her completely, leaving a hollow shell. Thomas looked up, his eyes pleading. He wasn't pleading for mercy. He was pleading for instructions. He had spent his entire life following the orders of a powerful parent, and in that moment he was simply waiting for the new orders to be given. Elizabeth Vance, the quiet widow, had become the new architect. The seasons turned. 6 months can be an eternity or the blink of an eye. For Elizabeth, it was a renaissance. She sat in the library of her house, truly her house, for the very first time. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. The silence in the room was no longer the oppressive, suffocating weight it had once been. It wasn't the silence of fear or unspoken resentment. It was peace. It was the rich, textured silence of solitude, of ownership, of a mind finally at rest. The house had changed, or rather, she had changed it. She'd aired it out, literally and metaphorically. The heavy, masculine scent of Richard's cigars was long gone, replaced by the faint, clean scent of lemon oil and fresh flowers from the garden.
His imposing portrait that had loomed over the fireplace was gone, replaced by a beautiful expansive seascape she had purchased at a local art fair. It depicted a turbulent ocean under a clearing sky, a perfect metaphor for her own life. Chloe and Thomas were still there, of course. They were phantoms in their own home, ghosts of a life they had lost. They moved through the halls with a quiet, defeated grace. Their lives had become the public performance Elizabeth had demanded. They smiled at the mailman. They made polite small talk if a neighbour stopped by, but inside the walls of the house a new silence reigned. It was the silence of capitulation. Mornings were the most telling. The three of them would sit at the large kitchen table for breakfast. Elizabeth would read the physical copy of the New York Times, turning the pages with a soft rustle. Thomas would stare into his coffee cup, his shoulders perpetually slumped. Chloe, who had once filled every silence with chatter about her social life, her friends, her plans, was now utterly still. Her phone, which had been a permanent extension of her hand, now lay face down on the table, dark and inert. Her carefully curated Instagram feed, once a daily highlight reel of a fabulous life, had gone dark the week after their visit to Golden Meadows. There were no more smiling selfies from charity luncheons, no more posed photos from exotic vacations. Her digital world had vanished, along with her real one. She had nothing left to perform. They were trapped, not by bars, but by their own terror of exposure. They lived comfortably, but without luxury. Their allowance, deposited into their accounts by the trust Elizabeth managed, was enough, but only just. Chloe had been forced to cancel her country club membership. Thomas had sold his sports car, replacing it with a sensible sedan. They were living the middle-class life they had always looked down upon, and the humiliation was a constant low-grade fever. They were prisoners of their own greed, serving a life sentence in a gilded cage of their own making, with their quiet, silver-haired mother as the warden. Elizabeth's relationship with Leo, however, had blossomed. He visited often, no longer just for obligatory holiday dinners, but for long, quiet afternoons. They'd sit in the garden she was now cultivating, and he'd tell her about his classes, his coding projects, the intricacies of the digital world he inhabited. He never asked about what had happened, about the sudden dramatic shift in the family dynamic. He didn't need to. He saw the change in his grandmother. He saw the new light in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her posture. He had helped her find the key, and he respected, with a profound and unspoken understanding, the way she had used it to unlock her own door. Their bond was forged not in the secrets she kept, but in the strength he saw in her. He was proud of her, and she felt that pride like a warm blanket. That morning Elizabeth had woken before dawn. She'd made a cup of tea and brought it to the library, settling into the comfortable armchair by the window, the one that had always been Richard's. She watched the sky lighten from inky black to a soft bruised purple, then to a brilliant, hopeful orange. The sun crested the horizon, its light flooding the room, chasing away the last of the shadows. She had lost a family. The one she'd thought she had. The son she had loved, the daughter-in-law she had tolerated, they had been strangers to her, their love a conditional contract based on inheritance. In losing them, she had reclaimed herself. Her life was no longer a postscript to Richard's story, it was a blank page. On the small table beside her chair she had placed a pen and a fresh leather-bound notebook, not green, but a deep, calming blue. She picked up the heavy, smooth pen, the ink full and dark, For the first time in 50 years, a story was stirring inside her that was entirely her own. A story of silence, of secrets, and of a quiet dawn. She uncapped the pen, the click echoing softly in the peaceful room, and brought its tip to the first clean, white page. She wrote the first sentence, and as her own story finally began to unfold, a life reclaimed from the ashes of another, we're left to wonder what comes next. What would you have done if you were Elizabeth? And what do you think was the first line she wrote in that notebook on the first day of the rest of her life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story.